They say that when you die, hearing is the last sense to go. I used to think that was a comforting thought. The idea that your loved ones could whisper their final goodbyes, and you could hear them as you drifted away into the dark. I was wrong. It's not comforting. It is the most terrifying, agonizing torture a human being can endure. Especially when the voices you hear aren't saying goodbye. They are actively planning your murder. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old. 4 years ago, I founded a tech logistics startup that exploded overnight. By my 30th birthday, I was the CEO of a company valued at over $40 million. I had the penthouse, the cars, the brutal work schedule, and a bank account that made me the undisputed anchor of my entire family. But out of everyone in my family, the person I took care of the most was my younger brother, Mark. Mark was the golden boy. He was charming, handsome, and entirely useless. He was 29 and still finding himself. I paid his rent. I paid off his sports car when it was about to be repossessed. I bailed him out of bad investments and worse relationships. I loved him. He was my blood. Then came the night of November 12th. It was raining heavily. I was driving home from a late board meeting. A drunk driver in a pickup truck blew through a red light at 70 miles per hour and T-boned my SUV on the driver's side. I don't remember the crash. I just remember waking up in absolute darkness. At first, I thought I was blindfolded. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids wouldn't move. They felt like they were glued shut with cement. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. I tried to swallow, to speak, to scream, but there was a thick plastic tube shoved down my throat, forcing air into my lungs. Panic hit me like a physical wave. I was entirely paralyzed, trapped inside the meat suit of my own body. Then I heard the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the machine, and the sterile smell of rubbing alcohol. I was in a hospital. I don't know how many days I floated in that silent, terrifying void. But then, a voice broke through the darkness. It was a voice I recognized instantly. It was Mark. "Is there any change, doctor?" Mark's voice sounded soft, concerned. "I'm sorry, Mark," an older, tired-sounding man replied. "The cerebral swelling has gone down, but brain activity is minimal. She is in what we call a persistent vegetative state. Sometimes patients wake up. Most times, they don't. As her sole next of kin and medical proxy, you're going to have to make some very difficult decisions soon." "I'm right here," I screamed in my mind. "I'm awake. I can hear you." But not a single muscle twitched. I heard the doctor's footsteps fade away as the heavy hospital door clicked shut. It was just me and my brother in the room. I waited for Mark to hold my hand. I waited for him to cry, to tell me to hold on. Instead, I heard the sharp, distinct sound of a lawyer's briefcase clicking open. "All right, he's gone," Mark said. His voice instantly changed. The fake concerned tone completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating sharpness I had never heard before. A second voice spoke up, a woman. It was Sarah, Mark's extremely expensive, cutthroat fiancé. "Did you get the proxy form signed?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed but urgent. "I signed them this morning," Mark replied, pacing the room. I could hear his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the linoleum. "I have full control over her medical decisions and temporary power of attorney over her estate." "Good," Sarah said, because I was looking at the company shares. Since the news of the crash, the stock has dipped 7%. If she stays on this machine for 6 months, the board of directors will force a buyout. We need to liquidate her assets now, while the valuation is still over $40 million. I felt a cold horror creeping through my paralyzed veins. We liquidate? I know. Mark sighed, sounding completely annoyed. Not sad, annoyed. "But the doctor said there's a mandatory waiting period. We can't legally pull the plug until she's been unresponsive for 30 days. 30 days? Sarah hissed. Mark, the wedding is in 2 months. The deposit on the Italian villa is due in 3 weeks. We can't afford it on your trust fund allowance. Mark walked closer to my bed. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my face. The brother I had protected my entire life was staring down at my helpless body. Don't worry, Mark whispered. It wasn't to me. It was to Sarah. I'm not letting my stubborn bitch of a sister ruin my life again. The second the 30 days are up, I'm pulling the plug. I'll cry for the cameras, we'll bury her, and then we cash out. Inside my dark, paralyzed prison, something broke. The panic and the fear evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a rage so absolute, so incredibly violent, that I am surprised the heart monitor didn't explode. My brother wasn't just planning my funeral, he was eagerly counting down the days to my execution. He had a 30-day timer. I had exactly 30 days to wake up, not to save my company, not to save my money. I had to wake up so I could destroy him. Time doesn't exist when you are locked inside your own skull. There is no day or night. There is only the endless, maddening beep of the heart monitor and the mechanical hiss of the ventilator pushing air into my lungs. And then there were the visits from Mark. He didn't come every day. When he did, he usually brought a large coffee and sat in the vinyl chair next to my bed, smelling like my expensive cologne. He never spoke to me. He used my hospital room as his personal, private office to dismantle my life. It was day 12 of the countdown. I knew because the nurses always announced the date when they came in to check my vitals. It's November 24th, Chloe. A kind nurse named Maria would whisper, adjusting my IV. Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. I screamed at my hand to move. I focused every single ounce of my willpower, every shred of my existence, on my right index finger. Move. Just twitch. Just once. But my body was a tomb. I was a ghost haunting my own flesh. The moment Maria left the room, Mark's phone rang. Hey, babe, he answered, his voice instantly brightening. Yeah, I'm at the hospital. No, still a vegetable. Listen, I just got off the phone with the real estate agent. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. The real estate agent? She says the penthouse is easily worth $5.2 million. Mark continued, completely casual. We can list it as coming soon to build hype. The second the 30 days are up and the estate clears, we flip it. Oh, and I went by the garage this morning. I'm keeping the Porsche, but I'm selling the Range Rover. The dealership offered $80,000 cash today. I signed the title over as her proxy. My mind spun in absolute disbelief. My penthouse. The home I had bought after working 80-hour weeks for 3 years straight. My cars. He was literally picking the meat off my bones before my heart had even stopped beating. I know, Mark laughed into the phone. A genuine, happy laugh. It's stressful, but think about the villa in Tuscany. We're going to have the most insane wedding. Anyway, I gotta go pretend to look sad for the doctors. Love you. He hung up. He didn't even look at me. He just played a game on his phone for 20 minutes, then left. Day 18 was even worse. Mark brought his fiancée Sarah into the room. I could smell her heavy floral perfume, the kind I always hated. She didn't even pretend to care. She walked right up to my bed, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. She looks terrible, Sarah noted, her voice dripping with disgust. Are you sure she can't hear us? Positive, Mark replied, shuffling some papers. The neurologist said her cortex is basically offline. She's essentially a very expensive houseplant right now. I wanted to rip the ventilator out of my throat and strangle him with it. Good, Sarah said. I felt a sudden, sharp tug on my left hand. I couldn't move, but I could still feel pressure. Sarah was prying my fingers apart. What are you doing? Mark asked, suddenly sounding nervous. This ring? Sarah grunted, pulling harder. It's the vintage Cartier diamond she bought herself last year for her birthday. It's easily worth $40,000. It matches my engagement ring perfectly. I'm taking it. "Sarah, you can't just take it off her hand in the ICU," Mark hissed. "Why not?" she snapped back, successfully sliding the cold metal over my knuckle. "She's dead anyway, Mark. It's just a matter of paperwork now. Consider it an early wedding present." She slipped my ring onto her finger, the ring I had bought to celebrate my company's first major milestone, the physical proof of my success. She stole it right off my paralyzed body. "Fine," Mark sighed, completely spineless. "Just hide it if the nurses come in. I brought the board documents you wanted to look at. If I use my proxy voting power at the quarterly meeting next week, I can force the board to approve the corporate buyout. I'll get a massive golden parachute, and we won't even have to deal with the company anymore." They were going to destroy my company, the startup I had built from nothing in my tiny apartment. Hundreds of people worked for me. They were going to sell it off for parts just so they could fund their lavish lifestyle. It was day 25. I had 5 days left until Mark could legally sign the order to disconnect my ventilator. 5 days until he officially murdered me for my money. I stopped panicking. I stopped being afraid. The sheer, unadulterated hatred I felt for the two people in that room crystallized into something diamond hard and incredibly focused. I didn't just want to wake up anymore. I wanted to survive. Because if I died, they won. If I died, they got the penthouse, the cars, the millions, and the company. I focused every single atom of my being on my right hand. Not the whole hand, just the index finger. The one that was missing the Cartier ring. Move. I commanded it. Move, you stupid piece of meat. Move. For hours, nothing happened. The darkness pressed in. The ventilator hissed. And then, just as the sun was setting outside my window, I felt it. It wasn't a big movement. It was a microscopic twitch. But I felt the fabric of the hospital blanket brush against my fingertip. I was still in the grave. But I had just dug my first inch toward the surface. It was day 28. I had 48 hours left. In exactly 2 days, Mark's temporary power of attorney would allow him to legally sign the DNR, the Do Not Resuscitate order. He was going to walk into this room, put on a sad face for the doctors, and unplug my ventilator. I was running out of time. My microscopic finger twitches weren't enough. I needed to send a clear, undeniable signal to the outside world, and I needed to do it while Mark wasn't in the room. It was 3 a.m. The night shift was quiet. Nurse Maria came in to check my IV and wipe my arms down with a warm cloth. She was humming a soft lullaby. I focused every single drop of adrenaline, fear, and absolute rage into my right hand, the one missing the Cartier ring. Move. Maria was wiping my wrist. I pushed against the heavy, invisible cement holding my body down. Tap, tap. My index finger hit the plastic side rail of the hospital bed. It wasn't a twitch. It was a deliberate, audible double tap. Maria froze. The warm cloth stopped moving. "Chloe," she whispered, leaning over my face. Her eyes were wide. "Chloe, sweetheart, squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I didn't just squeeze. I poured my soul into it. My fingers weakly wrapped around hers. "Oh my God," Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She immediately reached for the red emergency call button above my head to page the doctor. "No," I screamed in my mind. "If she pages the doctor, it goes on the official chart. Mark will see the chart." I had to stop her. I focused all my agonizing energy upward, toward my face. The cement cracked. My eyelids, heavy as lead doors, violently fluttered and snapped open. The harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU blinded me for a second, but then my vision focused. I looked straight into Maria's eyes. She pulled her hand back from the call button, completely stunned. I blinked twice rapidly. Then I looked at the call button and blinked twice again. No. Maria was a veteran ICU nurse. She had seen locked-in syndrome before. She saw the absolute sheer terror in my eyes. She didn't press the button. Instead, She grabbed a laminated alphabet board from the medical cart and held it up to my face. "Okay, Chloe," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "Look at the letters. Blink once when I point to the right one." It was agonizingly slow, but letter by letter, I spelled out my first sentence in almost a month. DONTTELLMARK. Maria frowned, confused. "Your brother? Chloe? He's been so worried." I blinked furiously. I waited for her to point and spelled my next words. HEWANTSMEDEAD. The color completely drained from Maria's face. She looked at the door, then back at me. "Are you telling me he's doing this for the estate?" I blinked once. "Yes." "Okay," Maria breathed, her professional demeanor instantly snapping into place. "Okay, you are legally my patient, and your cognitive function is officially active. I am going to bring the chief of neurology in here. Just the chief. We keep this off the digital system." An hour later, Dr. Aris, the tired, older neurologist who had spoken to Mark weeks ago, stood over my bed. He did a silent, thorough examination. I could blink. I could squeeze my right hand. I could move my toes. The swelling in my brain cortex had rapidly dissolved. I was coming back online. "It's a miracle," Dr. Aris whispered, "but the motor function recovery will take weeks. You still need the ventilator for now." Maria showed him the alphabet board. She explained what I had spelled. Dr. Aris looked at me, a deep, professional anger crossing his face. Doctors hate being manipulated, especially when it comes to life and death. "Mark has the proxy forms," Dr. Aris said quietly. "If he signs the withdrawal of care on day 30, legally, my hands are tied, unless the patient revokes that proxy herself." He held up the alphabet board. IREVOKE, I spelled. "Done," Dr. Aris said, nodding firmly. "You are officially under protective medical custody. Mark's proxy is completely void. But if we tell him now, he might try something desperate, or hire lawyers to contest your mental state. We need to buy you time to recover your speech and mobility so you can walk into a courtroom yourself." The next day, day 29, Mark walked into my room. I was awake, but the second I heard his expensive shoes in the hallway, I closed my eyes, relaxed my face, and played dead. He pulled up his chair. He didn't even look at me. He just put his phone on speaker. "Yeah, the lawyer said the paperwork is ready," Mark said to Sarah on the phone, munching on an apple. "Tomorrow at noon, I sign the papers. They pull the tube. We wait a few hours, and then the estate transfer automatically kicks in. The buyout of her company is scheduled for Friday." I lay there in the dark, listening to him casually plan my funeral while chewing his food. My heart rate would have spiked, but Dr. Aris had put me on mild beta blockers so the monitors wouldn't give away my conscious state. Mark thought he was sitting next to a corpse. He didn't know he was sitting next to a loaded gun, and my finger was finally on the trigger. Day 30, noon. The heavy door to my ICU room swung open. Mark didn't come alone this time. He brought Sarah, who was wearing a completely inappropriate designer black morning dress, and he brought a man in a sharp gray suit holding a leather folder. His lawyer. I lay perfectly still, my eyes closed. The heart monitor beeped at a steady, chemically controlled rhythm. I controlled my breathing, making sure not to fight the ventilator tube. "Dr. Aris," Mark's lawyer said, his voice slick and professional. "We have the finalized withdrawal of care documents. My client is ready to execute his proxy rights as the sole medical decision maker. It has been 30 days of persistent vegetative state." I heard the rustle of papers being placed on the tray table next to my bed. "Let's just get this over with," Mark sighed, sounding terribly inconvenienced. It's what she would have wanted. Have the nurses come in and turn off the machine. There was a long, heavy silence. I waited for the sound of the machine powering down. I waited for the panic. Instead, I heard Dr. Aris clear his throat. "I'm afraid that is impossible, Mark," the doctor said, his voice cold and absolutely immovable. "What do you mean, impossible?" Sarah snapped, her fake morning voice vanishing instantly. "We waited the mandatory 30 days. The timer is up." "The timer reset this morning at 4 a.m., Dr. Aris replied calmly. "During a routine scan, we detected a significant, unprecedented spike in her cerebral cortex. It was a brief, localized electrical surge. Legally, she is no longer classified as being in a persistent vegetative state. She is in a minimal conscious state." "A surge?" Mark almost yelled, stepping closer to Dr. Aris. "What does that even mean? Is she awake?" "She is completely unresponsive to external stimuli," Dr. Aris lied smoothly, looking right at my closed eyes. "But the legal parameters of the state mandate require another full 60-day observation period before a DNR proxy can even be considered." 60 days. Dr. Aris hadn't just bought me time, he had built me a fortress. 60 days? Sarah shrieked, completely losing her mind. "The wedding is in 2 months. The corporate buyout vote is on Friday. Mark, do something." "Doctor, this is ridiculous," the lawyer interjected. "We can get a court order." "You can try," Dr. Aris interrupted, his tone turning to pure steel. "But I am the chief of neurology at this hospital. If you attempt to override my medical hold on a living, recovering patient so you can liquidate her assets, I will personally testify in front of a judge that you are acting in bad faith. Now all of you, get out of my ICU." I heard the furious squeak of Mark's shoes as he stormed out, cursing loudly in the hallway. Sarah's heels clicked aggressively behind him. The heavy door slammed shut. I opened my eyes. Dr. Aris was looking down at me with a grim, satisfied smile. "You're safe," he whispered. "Now let's get you back to work." The recovery process over the next week was brutal, but I was fueled by pure, unadulterated vengeance. They removed the ventilator on day 35. My throat was raw and bleeding, but I could finally breathe my own air. My vocal cords were heavily damaged, leaving me with a raspy, painful whisper, but my hands were slowly regaining function. I didn't need a strong voice. I needed Wi-Fi. Nurse Maria smuggled an iPad into my room. She locked the door, pulled the privacy blinds, and propped it up on my lap. My fingers were incredibly weak, trembling as they hovered over the glass screen. But muscle memory is a powerful thing. I logged into my secure corporate email server. Mark thought he had outsmarted me. He thought his temporary proxy gave him the right to sell my company to the highest bidder on Friday. What Mark didn't know was that 3 years ago, when I founded the company, I built a poison pill clause into the corporate charter. A dead man's switch. I opened a new email to David, my chief operating officer and my most trusted friend. He had been fighting Mark's lawyers for a month, trying to protect my life's work. I typed slowly, my fingers shaking with effort. "David, it's Chloe. I am awake. Mark tried to kill me for the buyout money. Do not respond to this email. Do not tell anyone I am conscious. Execute Protocol Omega immediately. Freeze all executive proxy votes. Drain the company's liquid capital into the offshore emergency development accounts. Let Mark go to the board meeting on Friday. Let him think he won." I hit send. I leaned back into my hospital pillows, staring at the ceiling. Mark was about to walk into a corporate boardroom expecting a massive, multi-million-dollar golden parachute. Instead, he was going to walk straight into an empty, burning building. Friday morning arrived, the day of the emergency corporate buyout vote. I was sitting up in my hospital bed, doing physical therapy with Nurse Maria. My hands were getting stronger. My throat was raw, but I could speak in a harsh, broken whisper. I had a second burner phone resting on my lap. At exactly 10 a.m., my chief operating officer, David, walked into the main glass-walled boardroom of my company headquarters. He placed his laptop on the table, and then he dialed my burner number and put it on mute. I put my hospital phone on speaker, closed my eyes, and listened to the live feed of my own corporate execution. "All right, everyone." Mark's voice boomed confidently over the speakerphone. He sounded arrogant. He sounded like a man who had already spent the money. "Thank you all for coming. As the temporary executive proxy for my sister's estate, I am calling this emergency meeting to order." I could hear the shuffling of heavy leather chairs and the nervous coughs of my board members. They were terrified. They had spent 3 years building this company with me, and now my useless brother was selling it to a massive, faceless conglomerate for parts. "The offer from the buyer is finalized," Mark's expensive lawyer announced smoothly. $85 million for full acquisition of all patents, software assets, and client lists. As the majority shareholder proxy, Mark has the authorization to sign the immediate transfer of liquid capital. "Right," Mark said, clapping his hands together. "So, David, if you could just authorize the transfer from the primary accounts to the holding firm, I'll sign the final resolution, and we can all go home rich." There was a deafening, incredibly tense silence on the other end of the phone. I smiled, a tight, painful smile that hurt my bruised face. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mark," David said slowly, his voice calm and devastatingly precise. "What do you mean you can't do that?" Mark snapped, his confident tone instantly vanishing. "You're the COO. You manage the accounts. Transfer the $40 million in liquid assets to the buyer's holding account right now." "There is no $40 million in liquid assets, Mark," David replied casually, typing something on his laptop. The loud clacking of his keyboard echoed through the silent boardroom. "Excuse me," Mark yelled, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "I saw the quarterly reports last month. Where is the money?" "As of 8 a.m. this morning," David announced, reading clearly from a screen. "The primary accounts have a balance of exactly $4,200. All corporate liquid capital was automatically routed into offshore, heavily encrypted research and development accounts. Accounts that require a dual authentication, retinal scan override from the CEO." "She's a vegetable, David," Mark screamed, completely losing his mind. "I am the proxy. I override the accounts." "You can't," David fired back, his voice rising thick with absolute disgust. "It's a dead man's switch, Mark, a failsafe embedded in the corporate charter specifically designed to prevent a hostile takeover in the event of the CEO's sudden incapacitation. It's called Protocol Omega. Once activated, all proxy voting rights are instantly frozen, and all funds are locked in an unliquidatable trust for 12 months. "Who activated it?" Mark shrieked, his voice cracking. "Who gave the authorization code?" "I did," David lied, perfectly smooth, protecting my secret. As the COO, I recognized a hostile threat to the company's core assets, namely, you, Mark, trying to sell us out while your sister is fighting for her life. "You son of a bitch," Mark hissed, his breathing ragged. The lawyer tried to whisper something to him, but Mark shoved him away. "I'll sue you, David. I'll sue this entire board. I am taking the cars, I am taking the penthouse, and I am liquidating her personal estate today. We don't need the company." "Good luck with that," David said quietly, because the board just received a fascinating email from the hospital's chief of neurology, a temporary injunction blocking all asset transfers until a thorough medical review is completed. You don't have access to a single dime of her money, Mark. I hit the red button on my phone, ending the call. I didn't need to hear the rest of his tantrum. Mark had walked into that room expecting a golden parachute. He walked out holding an empty bag, drowning in wedding debt for an Italian villa he could no longer afford. He had exactly $0, zero power, and a fiancée who was only marrying him for the buyout. The financial strike was complete. Now, it was time for the physical blow, the moment I had been waiting for since the very first day in the dark. It was time to wake up. Exactly 1 hour after the board meeting abruptly ended, the heavy oak door of my ICU room violently swung open. It hit the wall with a loud crack. Mark stormed in. His face was flushed red, his tie was loosened, and he looked like a man who had just watched his entire future burn to the ground. Sarah was right behind him, furiously typing on her phone, complaining about the wedding planner. Mark didn't even look at the bed. He just started screaming at the ceiling, pacing the floor. "Do you know what your idiot COO just did?" Mark yelled, waving his arms at my supposedly unconscious body. He locked the accounts. He triggered some insane dead man switch. Your company is worthless to me now. I am in debt for a $200,000 wedding, and I can't even sell your damn shares. He finally stopped pacing and turned to look at my bed. I wasn't lying flat anymore. Nurse Maria had propped my bed all the way up. I was sitting perfectly straight. My eyes were wide open, locked entirely on his face. The ventilator was gone. The feeding tube was gone. I looked at my brother, and for the first time in 35 days, I spoke to him. My voice was a harsh, raspy, mechanical whisper, but in that silent hospital room it sounded like a thunderclap. He did exactly what I told him to do, Mark. Mark completely froze. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he was going to pass out. He took a physical step backward, his expensive shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Sarah dropped her phone. It hit the floor and shattered, but she didn't even blink. "Chloe?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling with a terror I had never heard before. You're awake? But the doctor said..." "The doctor lied," I rasped, keeping my eyes deadlocked on his. "He lied because I told him to, because if you knew I was waking up, you would have pulled the plug on day 30 anyway. Isn't that right, Mark? 30 days. That was my countdown." "No!" Mark stammered, raising his hands defensively. The arrogant corporate proxy from the boardroom was gone. He was instantly reduced to a terrified little boy caught stealing. "Chloe, no, you don't understand. We were just following your living will. We thought you were gone. I was trying to protect your legacy." "My legacy?" I let out a dry, painful laugh that scraped my raw throat. "You were going to sell my legacy for $85 million so you could pay the deposit on a villa in Tuscany. You were going to flip my penthouse. You sold my Range Rover for 80 grand cash on day 12. Sarah let out a pathetic, muffled gasp. Mark backed up until his shoulders hit the hospital wall. He realized the absolute horrifying truth. "I heard everything, Mark," I whispered, leaning forward slightly. "Every single word. I was locked inside my own body, screaming, while you and your fiancé picked the meat off my bones. You used my hospital room as your personal ATM." I slowly lifted my right hand. It was shaking, weak, but the index finger pointed directly at Sarah. "Take off the ring, Sarah," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy growl. Sarah looked down at her hand. The vintage Cartier diamond I had bought for myself was sparkling on her finger. She looked at Mark for help, but Mark was practically hyperventilating against the wall. "Take it off." With shaking hands, Sarah slid the ring off her finger and placed it silently on the rolling tray table next to my bed. "Good," I said, sinking back into my pillows. "Now, here is how the rest of your pathetic lives are going to play out. My lawyers have already filed the paperwork to permanently dissolve your medical proxy. You are officially evicted from the condo I pay for. The locks on my penthouse have already been changed by private security. And if the $80,000 from my Range Rover isn't deposited back into my personal account by 5 p.m. today, I am pressing federal charges for grand theft auto and wire fraud." "Chloe, please," Mark begged, actual tears spilling down his cheeks. He fell to his knees on the hospital floor. "Please, I'm your brother. I'm your blood. I have absolutely nothing. The wedding vendors are demanding payment. I'll be ruined." "You ruined yourself," I said, feeling absolutely no pity, not a single drop. "You tried to bury me alive, Mark, but you forgot one very important thing." I looked down at him, a millionaire CEO who had just survived her own execution. "I am the one who built this family's wealth, and I am the one who can turn it to ashes. Get out of my room. Get out of my life. And if you ever come within 100 feet of me or my company again, I will bury you in legal fees until you are sleeping on the street." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but 2 large hospital security guards stepped into the doorway. Dr. Ayers had called them the second Mark walked in. They grabbed Mark by the arms and dragged him, sobbing and pleading, out of the ICU. Sarah scrambled after them, leaving her shattered phone on the floor. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The room was finally beautifully quiet. I picked up the Cartier ring from the table, slipped it back onto my right hand, and smiled. It has been 2 years since the day I walked out of that hospital. And yes, I mean walked. The physical therapy was grueling. It took months to rebuild the muscle mass I had lost in that bed, and even longer to regain my full voice. But every single day of pain was worth it, because I was alive. Mark's life, on the other hand, imploded with spectacular speed. Without my bank accounts to fund his lavish Tuscan villa wedding, the international vendors immediately sued him for breach of contract. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt within a week. Sarah, realizing her golden ticket had just evaporated, packed her designer bags and left him exactly 21 days before their canceled wedding date. She even tried to keep her own engagement ring, but the jeweler repossessed it because Mark's credit card bounced. As for the Range Rover he sold, he didn't have the $80,000 to pay me back by 5 p.m. He had already spent a massive chunk of it on non-refundable wedding deposits. I kept my promise. I didn't hesitate. I pressed federal charges for wire fraud and grand theft auto. Mark's expensive lawyers suddenly vanished when they realized he couldn't pay their retainers. He managed to avoid actual prison time by pleading guilty to a lesser felony, but he now has a permanent criminal record. That record makes him completely unemployable in the corporate finance world he used to pretend to belong in. Last I heard, he was working the night shift at a logistics warehouse. Ironically, a warehouse owned by one of my competitors, and living in a cramped, damp studio apartment on the edge of the city. My parents tried to call me a few times, crying, begging me to forgive him and help my little brother out. I changed my phone number and moved them to a blocked email folder. Toxicity doesn't get a pass just because it shares your DNA. And my company, Protocol Omega, saved it. Once I was fully recovered, I returned to the boardroom, fired the members who had eagerly agreed to Mark's buyout, and promoted David to president. A year later, we didn't sell the company for $85 million. We took it public. Our IPO was one of the most successful of the year, and the valuation tripled overnight. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the vintage Cartier ring on my right hand. People ask me if I feel guilty for completely destroying my own brother's life. But the truth is, I didn't destroy him. I just survived him. He dug his own grave the very moment he looked down at my paralyzed body and saw nothing but a paycheck. I just let him fall in. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you loved watching my toxic brother get exactly what he deserved, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more daily revenge stories. And tell me in the comments below, would you have sent your own sibling to jail? Or was I too harsh? Stay safe out there, trust your gut, and I'll see you in the next video.